Hey everybody, David Kemp here, host of Highway to Health podcast with MarketScale. I hope you've enjoyed previous episodes, and we're so thankful for you joining with us today. You know, we talk a lot about the open road journey to improve patient outcomes, the improved overall health of our communities, and we'll continue doing that today. You know, it's so important with all of the changes that we've seen in healthcare over the last decade. It's so important to understand, you know, the new flexible solutions and options that our providers that they have so that they can deliver the right kind of care, the right services to their community. And, you know, education plays a big part in that. Teaching our providers and our patients what new solutions are out there to fit their needs and to improve the overall health of our communities that are so important to us. And that's why I'm excited to have our guest on today. We have Raja Abid, who's a health economics leader at Boston Scientific. He's got a great background, an incredible circular view of the healthcare system. And I'm excited to bring his insights, his experience, and his education to those of you that are listening today. So, Raja, thanks for being a part of this program. Welcome to Highway to Health.
David, thank you so much for having me today. It's my pleasure and honor to join you in this podcast, and I look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, can't thank you enough for being here. You and I have known each other for a long time. We were part of Med Assets together. We've played basketball together. But for those of us, or those that are listening that don't know don't know much about Boston Scientific, tell us first about yourself, about your family, and we'll get into healthcare in a minute. Tell us what you enjoy doing, you know, outside of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently I'm based out of Texas, but home for me is New Jersey, right? I grew up in the Northeast, spent most of my life out there, did undergrad out there at Rutgers, went to med school out there at UMDNJ, and then I wanted to explore, came out to Texas, right? Waco, Texas, Baylor University to pursue an MBA in healthcare administration. And as soon as I got to Texas, I absolutely loved it. I love the Southern hospitality. I love the culture here. The people that I met, I mean, it was just a huge shift from the life that I was living in New Jersey. And it's been about 10 years now, to be honest, since I moved to Texas. And I haven't even thought about going back to New Jersey. And during this time, I had the opportunity to work with some large health systems in Texas, Baylor Scott & White, Texas Health Resources, work at Med Assets temporarily, right, in between as they were going through an acquisition process. So it's been a fantastic journey professionally for me. And as well as, you know, while that professional journey was taking place, during this time, during the last 10 years, I got to grow my personal life as well, got married, and we have two beautiful kids, two boys who are now ages 6 and 3. And they mean the whole world to me. Family is probably the most important thing to me outside of God and outside of work.
I love to hear about your experience here in Texas. It's great to hear. You know, I'm a longtime Texan, and it's great to hear, you know, the perspective of folks that, you know, might not have grown up here. And so I'm glad you've found it positive, and we're glad to have you here too. Your background is pretty interesting to me. You know, a lot of times we talk to people that are, you know, in the healthcare world, and they've been segmented in a sub-vertical or a specific niche of the healthcare system. You've got a pretty holistic view of the healthcare system. You know, let's see, I don't want to mess this up. You got your bachelor's in cell bio and neuroscience, doctor of osteopathic medicine, your MBA from Baylor. You worked at Baylor Scott & White, got into tech with Med Assets. Now you're at Boston Scientific. You've got a great background and experience all across the healthcare system. How has that helped you bring all of those experiences? How have those things helped you when working with a great company like Boston Scientific?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, this is not a journey I planned out 10 years ago. You'd be like, these are the steps that I want to take, and, you know, what is my end goal? Growing up, my parents, you know, kind of pushed me towards medicine. And I actually had a strong affinity towards medicine because I was surrounded by physicians in the community. And so I always thought, like, hey, you know, being a physician is like the right career path for me. So focusing on that in my undergrad, getting there into med school, those were things that I thought I wanted, right? And I was moving in that direction. But to be honest, I realized that third year into med school, that there's more to healthcare, right? Healthcare is not just what happens in the hospital, it's what happens outside the hospital too. And the healthcare continuum is more than physicians and nurses. Of course, physicians and nurses, direct care providers play the most important part in that healthcare journey. But there's a lot of different individuals in the background who are supporting the healthcare system. And so as I started to have that realization third year into med school, I wanted to do something different, right? I wanted to do more than just direct care. So I tried to keep an open mind, right? And I said, well, let me, get an MBA. I know nothing about finance, nothing about strategy, nothing about marketing, right? And so I've been so focused on the sciences. Let me do something a little different. So I decided not to pursue a residency, right? Decided to go get an MBA with a focus in healthcare administration. And it opened my eyes, right? There were so many different aspects to healthcare that I had never been exposed to before. All I knew was clinical medicine, right? How to take care of the patient. And now I was getting exposed to the finances, the operations. And these are the things that really started to excite me. During my MBA, I had an opportunity to do an administrative residency at Scott & White in Temple, Texas. Got to work closely with the C-suite there. I had a great mentor who was the chief nursing officer at that time, Cindy Dunlap. She took me in. And all of these people, all of these individuals actually showed me how to run a large academic medical center, right? They gave me the opportunity to be a part of that process, that day-to-day operations. And as one can imagine, running a hospital is not an easy task, right? But also seeing the change that we were going through in the healthcare systems back about 10 years ago, there was a lot of transformation, right? I think the word transformation for healthcare has existed for over 10 years, but I was in the midst of, Scott & White transitioning from paper medical records to digital medical records, integrating Epic, kind of changing workflows, operations, how things were done, how quality measures were being measured or quality outcomes were being measured, right? So there's a lot of different things taking place at that time. And that was a fantastic experience. And honestly, the reason I am here today with Boston Scientific is because I kept an open mind. I said, let's continue during my early on in my younger professional years. Let me explore, right? Let me not be single-minded and be like, here's the end goal that I want to get to, and let's just rush and get there. I wanted to take a different path. I know I want to be successful professional at the end, but that path could be very different, right? For every individual. And let's just explore along the way. And that's what I did. I had a great experience in med assets, got to learn the contracting, the GPO side of the business, understanding how supply chain works, right? A phenomenal experience at Texas Health Resources, kind of understanding how to manage different service lines. A good example I was sharing with an intern yesterday. When you're in healthcare, everyone is important to that delivery of care. Everyone from the person who is cooking the meals in the kitchen, right? Because the food and the quality of the food and the temperature of the food and is it going to be something that's going to meet the diet requirements of that patient is important, as well as the person who's sterilizing the room and cleaning up, right? Like it takes a whole village to take care of a patient. But that's in the hospital. If you step outside the hospital, there's so many other players in healthcare. And I think that's where I've kind of kept an open mind and been exposed to this broader healthcare continuum. Insurance companies, Medicare, medical device companies, pharmaceutical companies, everyone plays such an important role in how healthcare is delivered today in America.
Often we'll say it takes a village. It's going to take a village to get where we want to go in terms of the kind of healthcare system we see in the future. And you described it perfectly. Everybody at the hospital, everybody outside the hospital, and then all of the ancillary services that go into not just the experience, not just the coordination of care, but the financial side of the business. Because, and I think one of the biggest misconceptions about healthcare for those that aren't in the industry is the kind of financial situation that most of our providers are in. You see these big, beautiful buildings and facilities that, that Baylor Scott and White have, THR has, and you think they must be doing really well. But in the reality of it, they're operating on razor thin margins. So now you have to get, you have to consider the insurance companies, the digital health solutions and EHR solutions, and the revenue cycle solutions that play such a part in keeping their doors open so that they can bill and collect claims accurately and timely, so that they can provide the right patient responsibility and financial information to the patient so they can pay for their care. And it absolutely, I love your topic about, even those in the kitchen. And you're exactly right. I couldn't have said it better. It's going to take everybody. It's going to take a village to get where we want to go. The drastic transformation that we've seen both digitally and through in the experience over the last 10 years is remarkable. I can't wait to see where we are 10 years from now. But you talked about, going from paper records to electronic records. During that whole time, we also had the big transition from ICD-9 to ICD-10 that played a huge role in our healthcare system. So you've seen and experienced some incredible transformation over the last 10 years. And what's really cool about your experience is you've seen it from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, I've been, I would say, blessed, right, to see it from different viewpoints. I saw it as a medical student, being able to round, shadow, be in the ORs, see how cases were being performed. I couldn't tell you the number of times I spent over 30 minutes looking for a patient chart, right? Because it was a paper record and the patient chart is with somebody else and the patient is in a different room or is wheeled down to radiology. And, we're trying to find that paper chart, right? The inefficiencies that existed. I also had the opportunity to be, awake at 3 a.m. when we're getting ready to launch an electronic medical record, right? And be there for those celebrations as we kick off that go live. As an administrator, right? Be supporting the IT team. What a great experience that was when I was at Baylor Scott and White, working with that IT team as we did that go live. And then, taking all of these different experiences from administrators, physician, being a patient myself in the hospital, and now, coming on this medical device side of the industry, it just gives you different viewpoints about how everyone's thinking about the business. What I will say is many of us haven't recognized that all these different divisions within healthcare, medical device, insurance companies, right? Hospitals, clinics, ASCs, they all got to start talking to each other. And that's not happening today because there are different incentives for all of these organizations, right? And so the only way you're going to improve quality, improve value, delivery of care is when everybody starts talking to each other, builds care pathways that make sense, that are efficient, highly effective, right? And that's probably a gap that we have. But because of the transformation we've had in the last 10 years, focusing on digital capabilities, focusing on efficiencies, I think the next 10 years will probably be about how do we get all these different individuals to start talking. And we're seeing it. And I'll tell you, there's some healthcare systems. I have national responsibility right now. So I get to go to different health systems, connect with different leadership. And there are some health systems that are thinking more broadly, more strategically about how do we connect the dots.
I think that's the next big step where we're going to see some efficiencies gained, some economies of scale in the healthcare environment, because there's so much data in healthcare. It's largely locked up in siloed systems and technologies to where, a lot of this information that could help with the coordination of care, delivery of care, are sometimes, siloed and locked up in different systems that aren't talking to each other. We've made great progress there. And it's not an indictment in any way in healthcare because there's reasons for that, right? Security and protection of that information is the number one priority. But we're starting to see, like you said, some of these large healthcare systems that do have a vision and in some way some leverage on some of these, technologies to start integrating and start talking to each other. This interoperability legislation that's come out recently, where you're starting to see these big systems open up their gates a little bit, talk with other systems, and really start connecting the dots across the healthcare continuum. That's really exciting. And that talks a little bit about the flexibility, the importance of flexibility in a solution that providers will be using and will be depending on. With all of the changes and the evolution of healthcare, the compliance regulations and legislation that come out all the time and change all the time, we're living in this ever-changing world in healthcare. Talk a little bit about the importance of the flexibility of a solution to meet the requirements, to meet the needs of a provider in today's healthcare.
So, I mean, I think you hit the nail on this, right? We live in a highly regulated industry. Healthcare in general, right? There's a lot of governing bodies, a lot of oversight, right? And it's all for the right reasons, for protecting the patient, for protecting physicians, providers, and for protecting, companies too, right? So as a result of all of this, it creates some guardrails between how much information is shared or not shared. Over time, going to your question about what is that flexibility going to look like, I think as everybody has a better understanding of what we can do with the information that is not being shared today, there will be more guidelines that will support, just interoperability for organizations to work together and come together for a common goal.
Yeah, well said. And it's only going to get better. I'm excited to see where we go from here. So let's talk a little bit about Boston Scientific specifically. In your role, the healthcare economic leader, and a healthcare economic leader in today's world is probably really important. We've talked a little bit about the financial constraints that providers have and the budgetary challenges that they might have when bringing on a new partner, a new solution. I'm sure that plays a part into the role that you have at Boston Scientific. So tell us a little bit about your role and the mission that Boston Scientific is on in the healthcare space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with Boston Scientific for coming up on 4.5 years, pushing towards 5 years. And my experience being in a health economics role has been fantastic, right? What we're trying to do is work closely with our customers to help them understand the value of our products, right? So as you mentioned, right, there's a lot of focus on financial value, economic value that health systems are trying to understand, through value analysis committees or due diligence or business reviews or, whatever activities that they're doing to understand any initiative, right? And so being at Boston Scientific, we're kind of a resource to them to help them understand the value of our products, right? What is that economic value of a laser, for example, right, that they're going to purchase from Boston Scientific? Are they going to be able to recoup their investment that they're going to make within this product or technology? If they're offering their patients different types of therapies, right, that are Boston Scientific therapies, what is that impact of those therapies on their practice, right? What is the potential revenue, downstream revenue that they could see? How does that compare to some of the competitive therapies that are in their market? So we're a lens to that, right? Our goal is to give them information based on data. That way they can decide whether a technology or a therapy makes sense for them to invest within that product for their patients and for their communities and for their practice, to be honest, because of all the focus on practice survivability and financial health.
Yeah, I could see a lot of education being needed, not just about Boston Scientific and your solutions, but also about the new therapies, the new services, the new procedures that are out there in the space. Our physicians, our caregivers, our doctors are so busy nowadays, and they have such a low bandwidth to do additional research and to do additional education. They probably look to you to teach them about what's out there and what they don't know. And in some ways, you're probably the thought leader and the expert in this space, to where they might look to you for education in a whole lot of ways.
I agree, right? So let me tell you something. When I was in hospital administration, right, I probably didn't give medical device companies enough credit, okay? Because innovation's happening in different ways. And as it comes to innovation for patient delivery and clinical care, medical device companies are leading the forefront with that. They're the ones that are spending resources on research and development, collecting voice of the customer, right? If medical device companies don't make that investment, there won't be innovation in how care is delivered, okay? And so now that I am with the medical device companies, I have a very higher appreciation of how innovation is going to happen in health system. It's going to be a partnership, right? Medical device companies come up with new products, technologies, right? We educate, to your point, like we educate the physicians. We're educating also the patients on what their options are. Because as you can imagine, most patients go to a physician and the physician is going to do what they've been doing for the last 15 to 20 years. Whereas there may be newer therapies in the market that they may not even be exposed to or heard of. And so as we bring these therapies to market, we got to educate the patients. We have to educate the physicians, show them the benefits of these technologies, and also educate them on how to do these therapies, right? How to do these procedures. And all of that requires a team, a partnership with medical device companies if we want to advance healthcare. And I would say, true innovation in clinical care is going to require a good partnership with medical device companies making these investments.
I love hearing those things because, we've been at technology companies, we've been at GPOs, now you're at med device. It's such a competitive space that companies like Boston Scientific have to push the envelope in terms of innovation to stay ahead of competitors. What's great about that for the healthcare community is better, more innovative, less invasive solutions are coming to market all the time. It's hard to keep up with it for anybody, but for somebody like a surgeon or a physician or a healthcare administrator that has so many things on their plate, it would absolutely be hard to keep up with it. And at the end of the day, think about your personal life. It's easier sometimes to just do what you know and do what you've always done, instead of making a change and growing, even though there might be some challenges associated with that growth because you're having to learn something new. And so you guys play an important role, a critical role in the evolution of healthcare to the patient. And the only way that gets to market is through education to the physicians, the surgeons, the healthcare administrators that have the decision, the choice on what solutions they bring in-house.
Yeah, absolutely. If we take a step back here and think about, what used to happen in the ORs, right, back in the day, a lot of procedures were done open, right? Then we moved to laparoscopic procedures. Then we moved to robotic procedures. These were all innovations that were created, through medical device companies, right? They came up with these innovative solutions. And the goal for them is really, how do we create efficient, effective, quality outcomes? But along that way, you have to train physicians who've always done an open procedure or always done a chole procedure, right? To move through different platforms. And that's not an easy change, right? There's a lot of, as you know, with any change, there's resistance before there's acceptance. And, whenever you bring a new product, you're changing the way a physician thinks, a provider thinks, and that takes time.
It does. And when you think about the last few years, a lot of this education used to be distributed at conferences, at trade shows, at in-person events. And in the last 2 years, a lot of those events, those trade shows, those conventions haven't been taking place because, COVID shut down a lot of these in-person activities, especially in the healthcare community, because, these resources are very valuable. And for them to take the risk of going out and into a largely populated convention or a trade show and getting sick, now they're unable to perform, their duties as a caregiver. And so this education over the last few years has been harder and harder to distribute and get in front of these healthcare administrators and decision makers. If you have insight into how Boston Scientific and how even you maybe specifically have gotten that information out into the world and into the hands of the decision makers at these providers, what has worked well recently for you guys while these in-person activities and trade shows were on the shelf?
It was I would say the COVID years were definitely a challenge. Not only did these trade shows end, but most providers, hospitals kind of closed the doors to vendors, right? Because they didn't want anyone extra within their facilities, right? If they weren't absolutely needed. They were focused on trying to just, stay afloat, given all the challenges and the burden that they had with staffing issues, supply chain issues. And so it did create a challenge for us. We tried to do a lot of things virtually as much as possible to kind of mitigate some of the impact from not having in-person meetings or trade shows. We were only as good as our customers allowed us to be, right? And everyone was different in terms of how they addressed COVID and what their restrictions were. So it's definitely been a challenge. I would say at least today, in 2022, customers are back, right? They're more open to it. We've started doing trade shows again, getting there in front of physicians, meeting them in, where they like to learn, right? And in their facilities, in their clinics, and started having those discussions again. Boston Scientific, we actually also invested a lot in our digital capabilities because a lot of these resources that were traditionally being provided by being in person now can be accessed through resources that we have online, and they can better understand what's happening in the market if they wanted to, leveraging some of our digital resources.
Meeting your customers where they are is going to be more and more important moving forward because we're just facing challenges today that we haven't faced traditionally. And so, when you look at the brands that, whether it's in the consumer space or the B2B space, when you look at the brands that have really performed well over the last few years, it's the ones that have found a way to go directly to their community with education, experiences, and information that they need to do their job well and to overcome challenges that they're facing every day. It sounds like Boston Scientific's doing a great job of meeting those customers, those decision makers, where they are to get them the information they need at the times that they need it.
Yep, absolutely. We're always listening to our customers, right? What are their pain points? We're trying to create innovative ways to address those pain points. Because if our customers aren't happy, and our customers being, hospitals and providers and patients, if they're not happy, then we're not meeting our goals, right? And if we don't continue to innovate, to your point, a company that doesn't innovate may as well not exist because that's not the future.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, and it goes back to that, it taking a village mantra that we had at the beginning of this conversation where, it takes the payers, it takes governmental agencies, it takes the provider, it takes innovative solutions to all come together in harmony to deliver, these innovative solutions that improve the outcomes, that improve the experience and the overall health of our communities. It truly does take everybody for it to make sense. And you guys are definitely playing your part. Tell, as we're wrapping up here, if there's one thing that you wanted to get across to our listeners about your role, about Boston Scientific, or about healthcare in general, based on your experience, what would that one thing be that you wanted to make sure our listeners heard clearly?
Healthcare is a fantastic industry. There's so many different avenues within healthcare, whether it's insurances, provider side, medical device side, pharmaceuticals, digital, IT, marketing. There's so many different facets to healthcare. I would say you can have a phenomenal career being in the healthcare industry and doing what you love. Just keep an open mind, right? Take a risk sometimes if it makes sense, but keep your options open. Like, develop a broad viewpoint on what is healthcare, and over time you'll realize that this industry is just phenomenal in terms of what it has to offer. And most importantly, at the end of the day, healthcare in general is improving lives, right? We are impacting families. And when you see patients coming out of ORs or, recovering from cancer, we're changing someone's day. We're giving them the ability to live, right? Live healthier. And that's important, right? So why did I join healthcare? Why am I in healthcare? Is because patients still matter to me. At the end of the day, right, the end goal is, am I doing something that's going to improve the communities around me, improve the lives of patients? Can I make an impact? I'm not a provider. I don't directly interact with that patient, but I work in a segment of the industry that does help facilitate that patient journey. And so if as you're thinking about careers, if you're like, I want to be an individual who can help others, get in healthcare. And it doesn't have to be being a provider, which, by the way, providers do play the most important role in delivery of healthcare, but you can make that impact indirectly through a lot of different ways in healthcare.
Man, that does my heart a lot of good. I've said it before too on this podcast. Nowadays, especially with the generation that's coming into the workforce, one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we're getting, at an employer is, I want to serve a bigger purpose. I want to have greater meaning. I want to do good in my community. And that's inherent in healthcare. And it doesn't matter what role in the healthcare ecosystem you play. At the end of the day, if you're in healthcare, you get to make an impact in your community. You get to make an impact in individuals' lives. And if you're out there looking for a bigger purpose with your career, healthcare is a no-brainer. And I love the fact that you said it doesn't have to be a physician. It doesn't have to be a surgeon. It doesn't have to be a caregiver. It can be in a role where you're making economics work for a provider and bridging the gap between innovative solutions and financial stability and success for a provider. It could be anything. It could be in education. And so I love that you said that. I really appreciate that you said that because, I don't think there should be a retention problem in the healthcare industry because, at the end of the day, if you're in healthcare, you're impacting lives. And also, you know what? You may be healthy now. Ultimately, we're all going to be a patient. And so the impact that you make on the healthcare system is ultimately going to serve a personal or selfish service as well. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be a patient at some point. Your kids, your parents, your spouse are going to be patients also. And so you can make a direct impact on your own life, the lives of the ones you love, and a greater good within the community. And, I don't have the holistic view on the healthcare system that you have, but you don't have to. You can just get to be a part of it, and the rewards will come. And so I'm so thankful that you said that. And this has been a blast, Raja. I appreciate you being on the show. You've taught me a lot, and continue to teach the community because what you have to share is really important.
David, like I mentioned earlier, it's truly an honor to be here. I appreciate you inviting me to your podcast. I've learned a lot from you along the way too. I'm grateful for our connection several years ago, right? Playing basketball and connecting at MedAssets. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to join you today.
Well, anytime. You're welcome back whenever you want. We'll have to connect on the court here soon.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Best to your family. We'll talk again soon. Thanks again.
Thank you, David.